أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد
اللهم صل على محمد
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Yesterday I began this discussion on religious pluralism and the challenge that it faces, that it poses for us. And as an introduction to this topic, I want us to be grounded first and foremost in this mainstream idea of how we understand the diversity of religions. The fact is that we have many religions. Many of them, according to our beliefs as well, are valid, legitimate religions that were revealed by Allah to prophets, and we have a level of respect for them. We refer to them as the people who follow us as Ahlul Kitab, and we refer to those religions with respect because of their connection to authentic and real prophets of God. But yesterday I spoke to you about the idea of kind of a narrative of how we understand those religions, why Allah revealed multiple versions of this. Maybe we can even tweak that explanation and say, not even use the vocabulary of multiple religions. Go sit next to your parents. Where are your parents? Go sit next to your parents and make sure your parents keep you with them. Yeah, it's really important in these gatherings that you keep your children with you. Right? Train them to sit down and sit with you as young as they are. Even a 2-year-old and 1-year-old can be trained to sit, and they should be with you all the time. You can start training them right from that point. If you don't train them then, when they're 10 years old and 15 years old, they won't care. They'll be out in the parking lot with their devices, texting and playing games. They won't care about this because they were never trained along the way. Right? So please make sure that you're training your kids right from the very beginning. So instead of even referring to them as multiple religions, I think that vocabulary is not the right vocabulary to use. It's one religion, and I'll read a verse today that emphasizes that fact. It's one religion revealed multiple times because of all those things that we talked about yesterday. Sometimes updates are needed, more advanced thought can be communicated because people's capacity has been increased. Sometimes corruption happens in the original message. It needs to be revamped and reinvigorated with that truth that has been lost. Today what I want to do is I want to look at several verses that we have in the Quran that corroborate this narrative that I talked about yesterday. Again, to stay grounded in what's right and what we know to be true before we get into the verses that become a little bit more difficult to understand, and those verses that have been used by advocates of pluralism to try to support their point of view, which says that it's not the case that each religion subsequently abrogates or replaces the old religion and you should follow the latest version of it, but rather Allah reveals these multiple religions, and you can use that vocabulary now with pluralism, multiple religions, and He intends for them all to continue to exist in parallel. That at the present time we have a valid religion of Christianity and a valid religion of Judaism and other religions as well. The pluralists, even amongst the Muslims who advocate for this, they even refer to some branches of Hinduism as being valid religions. Despite the fact that we know Hinduism to be a shirk religion, a religion of polytheism, they'll claim that there are monotheistic kind of roots to it, and those monotheistic roots of Hinduism are true, and that's also a valid religion, they'll argue. So that's what we have to deal with in the coming days. But today, again, we want to stay rooted in these solid ideas that we know that are mainstream, that are accepted and understood by our scholars. So I'm going to share with you about 4 different passages from the Quran and talk through them and reflect on these verses to help us to ground ourselves in the Quranic teaching. The first set of verses, actually many of these verses are coming from Surah Ali Imran. So the first set is Ali Imran chapter 3 verses 81 through 85. It's a large chunk, so I'll read phrase by phrase and translate for you and explain to you as we go. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذ أخذ الله ميثاق النبيين لما آتيتكم من كتاب وحكمة ثم جاءكم رسول مصدق لما معكم لتؤمنن به ولتنصرنه. So Allah asks us to recall and remember. These verses start with وَإِذْ, right? It's always a story. He's saying, recall when such and such happened. Even if he's talking about the Day of Judgment, he's saying, call to mind when such and such will happen. So wa'idh, it's one of those key words in the Quran that he's going to tell a story now. He's going to remind you of something that's happened. وَإِذْ أَخَذَ اللَّهُ مِيثَاقَ النَّبِيِّينَ. So remember the time when Allah took a special mithaq from the prophets. Mithaq referring to a covenant. Right? We have the word ahd and mithaq that are used in the Quran to refer to covenants that Allah takes. We have covenants that are taken with all of humanity. Right? The verse that talks about with أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ وَأَشْهَدُهُمْ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ. That's also a mithaq. It's referred to as ayatul mithaq, which refers to perhaps some historical time before our creation when we were created. Perhaps there's an allegory behind it. We won't get into the details of that verse. But that's a mithaq, a covenant that Allah took with all of us at some point. Either at some point in history before we were created in this world, or it's an allegory talking about how He is constantly engaging in this covenant with us. He's given us sufficient guidance from the outside in the form of prophets and books. He's given us guidance from the inside in the form of our intellect. And it's as clear that He's our Lord to us. It's as though He's standing right in front of us constantly saying, Alastu bi rabbikum? Am I not your Lord? And since we're fully capable of comprehending that, and we have no excuse but to know that He is our Lord, it's as though we're constantly saying, Bala, yes, of course you are our Lord. So that's a covenant that's taken generally from all human beings. But then the Quran also mentions specific covenants that were taken from the prophets. And then we have in Surah Al-Ahzab, there's a specific mention of a covenant that's taken from the Ulul Azm min al-Rusul that we talked about yesterday. Those special 5 prophets that are mentioned in Surah Al-Ahzab as well. That there's a special covenant that's a mithaqan ghalidha that verse mentions. An even heightened, more serious and more difficult covenant that was taken from those particular prophets. But this verse in Ali Imran is talking about a general covenant that's taken from all the prophets. Right, so this is Allah speaking to the prophets, making them agree to do certain things. Right? So, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ اللَّهُ مِيثَاقَ النَّبِيِّينَ. What was the mithaq? What was the text of that covenant? لَمَا آتَيْتُكُم مِّن كِتَابٍ وَحِكْمَةٍ ثُمَّ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ. So whenever I send you books and wisdom, right? Those are also key words that our commentators help us to understand that kitab, sometimes some of the commentators say that kitab refers to legal systems and law. The hikmah refers to belief systems, right? So it's that same practical and theological, those 2 aspects that we talked about yesterday, those 2 are sent. So whenever these are sent to you, whenever I give them to you, ثُمَّ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مُصَدِّقٌ لِمَا مَعَكُمْ. And then subsequently, after I've given you one set of guidance in the form of a kitab and hikmah, then a subsequent prophet comes, a subsequent messenger comes, who confirms whatever is with you. مُصَدِّقٌ لِمَا مَعَكُمْ. So what should your reaction be? The covenant says that when I give you guidance, and then time elapses, and then there's another messenger with new guidance who also comes, who is not contradicting anything that you've learned before. He's simply corroborating what you've learned before, perhaps adding and completing the picture, but never contradicting what you learned before. What should your response be? لَتُؤْمِنُنَّ بِهِ وَلَتَنْصُرُنَّ. You must also believe in that subsequent messenger and aid him and help him in whatever way you can. Right? So this covenant is being taken from these prophets. Allah is making the covenant with these prophets, but clearly from the context, it's also with the prophets and the followers of those prophets. Right? So the idea then is when Moses comes, for instance, and he teaches you things, and then subsequently, several generations later, you have another prophet named Isa who comes. Right? The Quran tells us he's مُصَدِّقٌ لِمَا بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ مِنَ التَّوْرَةِ. That I'm there to affirm and confirm whatever has come before me in terms of the Torah. Then what should the response of the followers of Moses be? It should be to do tasdeeq and to confirm whatever Jesus is teaching and to help him. لَتُؤْمِنُنَّ بِهِ وَلَتَنْصُرُنَّ. So iman in the new teachings and nasr, aid and help in whatever way you can to support Isa, because he is in that same line and he's the true successor of Musa. Okay. قَالَ أَأَقْرَرْتُمْ وَأَخَذْتُمْ عَلَى ذَلِكُمْ إِصْرِي. Once Allah made this covenant with His prophets, He asked them, do you testify to this? Do you confirm the text of this? Do you agree to these terms? And وَأَخَذْتُمْ عَلَى ذَلِكُمْ إِصْرِي. And will you take this covenant from your people as well, so that not only you, prophets, are in line with this and you agree to these terms, but also your followers should also agree to these terms. Isr with a sad is a synonym for ahd. It's also a kind of covenant that Allah is asking the prophets to take from their people, their followers, so that they also agree to abide by this. When subsequent prophets come, they should confirm them and believe in them and help them, just as they believed in the previous prophet. قَالُوا أَقْرَرْنَا. The prophets in this covenant, they all unanimously said, yes, we accept these terms. قَالَ فَاشْهَدُوا. Then Allah emphasized this and said, everyone testify that you have agreed to the terms of this covenant, you've accepted that, so testify this. فَاشْهَدُوا وَأَنَا مَعَكُمْ مِنَ الشَّاهِدِينَ. I'm also one of the ones who will bear witness to this. Right, so very formal, very important circumstances happening, and Allah describes it with a lot of pomp, and we see that there's a serious agreement being made between Allah and His prophets. فَمَنْ تَوَلَّى بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. What about those people who turn their backs on this covenant and break the terms? He says those who turn away after having gone through this and agreeing either directly with Allah, of course not the Prophet is going to go against it, but if theoretically, a lot of times Allah in the Quran, He speaks theoretically, that even if this Prophet of mine were to turn away, what would I do to him? Right? Of course the Prophet's never going to do it, but he's communicating to us that, even the Prophet, if he's to step out of line, look what I'll do to him. Now think about you, you're not even a Prophet, you're not nearly as close to me as this Prophet was. If I'm willing to do this to the Prophet if he turns away, what am I going to do to you if you turn away from your agreements and if you go against what you've agreed to do? Okay. So those who turn away, whether they're prophets who will never do it, or the followers, which unfortunately sometimes do it, if they turn away, فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. And these people are those who are corrupt, those who are evil, who are fasiq. Then he continues in verse number 83, أَفَغَيْرَ دِينِ اللَّهِ يَبْغُونَ وَلَهُ أَسْلَمَ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ طَوْعًا وَكَرْهًا وَإِلَيْهِ يُرْجَعُونَ. Then Allah asks rhetorically, do these people, having called to mind the covenant that was taken, right? Once you keep in mind that this covenant was taken, all this was already stated and clearly communicated. Is it now the case that the people around you, O Prophet, يَبْغُونَ غَيْرَ دِينِ اللَّهِ, do they seek other than the religion of God? Do they say that, for instance, we follow the teachings of this old prophet, but we're going to ignore the new prophet? Right? So is it the case that people are going against the covenant and they're going against the will of God and following another religion besides the religion Allah wanted them to follow, instead of following and switching from that prophet to the next prophet, and in so doing actually following that prophet's teachings? If they make the claim that, no, I'm going to stick with Moses, I'm not going to switch to Jesus. Right? Let me stick with Moses and stay loyal to him, and this is what I was supposed to do, and they ignore the new teaching. In reality, what they're doing is they're going against this covenant that the prophets and the followers of the prophets have taken. We understand that all the prophets are on the same team, they're all with the same message. Following the subsequent one is the same as following the previous one, because they're on the same team, and we're supposed to follow the latest of these divinely sent prophets. So is it the case that they seek other than the religion of God, when all of the cosmos, وَلَهُ أَسْلَمَ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, everyone and everything that's in the heavens and the earth, everything submits to Him. Everything's doing Islam, everything's submitting to Allah, and these few people, who are a minority of creation, they are now going against the grain and against the rest of creation, and they're seeking other than the religion of God and submitting to something that's not God, but rather their own desires and their own selfish motives. So everything in the heavens and the earth submits to Allah, طَوْعًا أَوْ كَرْهًا. Some do it willingly. Those that are conscious, those that are able to, then they submit willingly. Those that are not conscious, they have no will to be able to choose to accept Allah and believe in Allah or not, like inanimate objects, they do it by force. right? But there's still everything in one way or the other, either willingly or unwillingly submits to God, except for these people, and these people are seeking other than God to submit to. وَإِلَيْهِ يُرْجَعُونَ, and you're going to be returned to Him anyway on the Day of Judgment, and He's going to judge you, but here you are seeking some other path, another religion. قُلْ آمَنَّا. The next verse is now addressing the Prophet and saying, now keep in mind the covenant, keep in mind the fact that there are some who go away from this covenant and seek other kinds of faiths. Now He's telling the Prophet and us what we should be doing. قُلْ, say, آمَنَّا بِاللَّهِ, that we believe in God. وَمَا أُنزِلَ عَلَيْنَا, and whatever God has revealed to us. Right? وَمَا أُنزِلَ عَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَإِسْمَاعِيلَ وَإِسْحَاقَ وَيَعْقُوبَ وَالْأَسْبَاطِ, and whatever was revealed to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Ismail first. Ismail and Isaac and Jacob and the literally the grandsons. Asbat is Sibt, is grandsons. So it's the grandsons of Jacob. Right? And so that's the term that's used for the 12 different tribes of the Jews, and all the prophets that were sent in those different tribes. So not all the sons of Jacob were not prophets. They're the ones who threw their brother Yusuf into the well. Right? They had serious problems. They reformed themselves. They corrected themselves, but they were certainly not infallible prophets. Sometimes people have a misunderstanding that the sons of Jacob are all prophets. That's not the case. But in the descendants of Jacob, in those 12 different tribes of the Bani Israel, and Yaqub being Israel, his name was, his title was Israel. So the Bani Israel are the sons of Jacob. These 12 different tribes, Yusuf and Benjamin being one, but then the rest of the 10 brothers having the other tribes. So these are referred to in the Quran as al-asbab, these descendants in the tribes of the Jews. So we believe not only what has been revealed to our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but also whatever has been revealed to all the other prophets. So this is the way to abide by the covenant, to believe in the latest version and also to reaffirm whatever was revealed to the past prophets as well. وَمَا أُوتِيَ مُوسَى وَعِيسَى, and in particular, out of those asbat, right, two of those prominent asbat prophets, one was Musa and one is Isa, who are ulul azm, major prophets who have brought new systems of law as well. We believe in whatever they have sent down, what was sent down to them as well. وَالنَّبِيُّونَ مِنْ رَبِّهِمْ, and all prophets, other 124,000 minus these who were mentioned, we believe in whatever was sent down to all of them. لَا نُفَرِّقُ بَيْنَ أَحَدٍ مِّنْهُمْ, we're not allowed to, and we don't differentiate between them. Now this is always, I remember when I first struggled with this verse, I always used to think, well, we say, for instance, about our Prophet, he's Ashraful Anbiya, Ashraful Nabiyyin. Right? So clearly he's the best of the prophets, the most virtuous, the closest to Allah. Other prophets, therefore, are at a lesser level, still amazing, still way above us, but they're at a lesser level compared to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then how can we say لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله, that we don't differentiate between the prophets? Where if we're putting ranks and saying this prophet's at a higher rank and those prophets are a lower rank, aren't we doing tafriq? Are we differentiating between the prophets? What the verse means is we can't say نؤمن ببعض ونكفر ببعض. That's tafriq that we're not supposed to do. To say I believe in some and I don't believe in others. I like Jesus, but Moses I don't like. Right? To have that kind of a relationship and say, I'm not sure about this prophet, I don't like his teachings, he didn't seem to be the right kind of prophet, but I like this prophet. Or sometimes even with imams, unfortunately sometimes we'll have Shia who, when it comes to Imam Hussein, they're gung-ho, of course he's our imam. When it comes to Imam Hassan, sometimes unfortunately because of the lack of understanding of who he was and what kind of a life he lived, they think, maybe he was a lesser of an imam, he wasn't really that special. They'll separate themselves from him, and they'll do tafriq between the ai*imma as well. That's not acceptable. All of these prophets, all of these imams, all of these guides that Allah has sent, they're all from God. Rejecting any one of them is tantamount, is equal to rejecting Allah Himself, because He's the one who sent them with authority. So I can believe in every single one of them, save one. If I reject that one, it's as though I've rejected Allah Himself and rejected all the prophets. Right? So that's when we say لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله, in order to abide by this covenant, we have to believe in all of the prophets and not differentiate between them and believe in some and reject others. وَنَحْنُ لَهُ مُسْلِمُونَ, and we submit ourselves as Muslim, we submit ourselves to Allah. So this is the way that we are being commanded to abide by the covenant that Allah took from the prophets, and then by extension from all of us as well. Then the last verse in this segment, in verse 85, he says, وَمَن يَبْتَغِي غَيْرَ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا فَلَن يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ. Anybody who seeks out other than this submission in Islam as a religion, that will not be accepted from him. Right, so this is one of those verses that's very strong and very clear in what we were talking about yesterday. Right, seeking out any other religion besides Islam is unacceptable. Right? وَهُوَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. And he will in the hereafter be one of the losers. So this al-Islam that's mentioned here, in the previous verse we had Muslimun as well. So al-Islam, think of it in its linguistic sense first, Islam being taslim. There's in the khutbah of Imam Ali Islam as well, he says, al-Islam huwa taslim. Right? So the meaning of Islam is submission to Allah, the divine will. It's also, of course, used as the proper name of our particular religion, the religion of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has brought. So in this verse we should be careful not to confuse the two and think that al-Islam that's being mentioned here is the proper name Islam as a religion of our Prophet. The al-Islam that's mentioned here, we'll talk about in one of the subsequent verses as well, Inna Dina Inda Allah al-Islam. Right? This is a reference to the linguistic meaning, submission to Allah through all these divine teachings of all the prophets that have been sent. So following Ibrahim in the time of Ibrahim is Islam. Following Musa in the time of Musa is also Islam. Following Isa in the time of Isa is also Islam. That doesn't mean that they follow the same law, the same practical aspects that we now follow. We know, for instance, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. That fasting is prescribed for us as it was prescribed for others. So we know that there was some sort of fasting in all these different religions, but we don't know exactly what kind of fasting they did. Was it dawn to dusk with the same kind of abstinence that we have now? Was it, several days in a row where you couldn't eat anything, maybe you just drank water? Was it, we don't know exactly what the details were. But we know there was some sort of fasting. And salah, that we now have some form of worship, a formal worship that engages our body and our words and our mind. Right? That's also a common thread that's throughout all the prophets. Right? But was it exactly the same? Did they have qiyam and sujood and ruku and all these different positions? And certainly they didn't speak Arabic, and many of these people were non-Arabic speaking, and so they wouldn't be speaking Arabic in their salah. Right? So the particular practices would be different. Even some of the laws, marital law for instance. I don't know if you've ever thought about why is it in Islam, the hadith of the Prophet says, "An-nikahu sunnati, wa man raghiba an sunnati laysa minni." Right, getting married is one of my sunnahs, and if anyone turns away from my sunnah and says, "No, I don't want to become married. I don't want to get married. I'm going to stay celibate," then the Prophet says, "Man raghiba an sunnati falaysa minni." If you turn away from my sunnah, then you're not from me. Right, there's no more connection between you and me because you're going a different path. You're following your own path, you're not following my sunnah. So there's great emphasis in Islam on getting married, and being celibate is highly discouraged. It's, makruh, and it could even be haram if you're falling into temptation. But then we have, when Yahya alayhi salam is being praised in the Quran, what does Allah say about him? كَانَ حَصُورًا. He was hasur, he was a celibate. Right, hasur means somebody who puts up a hasr, kind of a restriction around himself and says, I'm going to be to myself, I'm not going to be engaged with anyone else. Right, so he was a celibate. Even Isa alayhi salam, we have no evidence that he got married. It seems like he did get married during his lifetime, at least the short life that he lived before he was raised up. Maybe he'll get married when he comes back, we don't know what happened afterwards. Lady Maryam alayhi salam also, she never got married. Right, so in that time, those three individuals who were stellar, amazing individuals, they didn't get married. And Yahya is even being praised for being hasur. When Allah is he's praising him for all of his different qualities, and hasur is one of the things he singles out to praise him. Right? So the point of mentioning this is that one of the ways we understand the difference between what these three individuals did and what we are now supposed to do now. None of us, we're not allowed to follow their example and say, well, I want to be like Yahya in this particular manner and be hasur. Or a woman can't say, I want to be like Lady Maryam and I'm going to also abstain from marriage and stay single all my life. that's not the right way now. Now we should follow the sunnah of our Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt, and marriage is an important part of life. Right? So my point is to say that in the practical aspects, one of the explanations we have is that maybe their law was different at that point. Maybe for whatever reason Allah decided that at that time celibacy was the greatest good, and that is actually the ideal. You can get married, but this is a better thing to do. And maybe that was the law of that time. But now, of course, the law is different, and marriage is highly encouraged. Alright, so the point is that the particulars, the way of practicing between these different Islams, between these different kind of teachings of Islam, if you say it like that, is perhaps different, but the core of the religion, certainly all of the beliefs are the same. The essence of and the spirit of submission to Allah, the spirit of worship and devotion to Allah, living a particular life that's pleasing to Allah, all that's common throughout all of them. So anyone, he says, who diverts from this covenant and following through with this covenant is going on this other path. They're doing ibtigha ghayr al-Islam dinan. They're following other than Islam as a religion. فَلَا يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ. That won't be accepted from them. وَهُوَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. And in the hereafter, that person will be a loser. Alright, so that's one section that I wanted to speak about that reflects some of the things we talked about yesterday as well, and shows us the covenant and how we're supposed to fulfill this covenant by accepting not only the teachings of our Prophet, but the past prophets as well. The second section I want to speak about is also from Surah Ali Imran, verse number 19 and 20. إِنَّ الدِّينَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ الْإِسْلَامِ وَمَا اخْتَلَفَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ إِلَّا مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَهُمُ الْعِلْمُ بَغْيًا بَيْنَهُمْ وَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ سَرِيعُ الْحِسَابِ. The verse begins by saying that the religion in God's eyes, the religion in God's eyes, but emphasis on the, is Islam. Inna dina indallah al-Islam. Again, with the same understanding of what al-Islam means, it's not talking about al-Islam meaning the specific religious practices and teachings that Prophet Muhammad has brought, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But more generally speaking, it's that unified religion that all of the prophets have been teaching. The culmination of which and the most perfect form of which is what our Prophet has brought us. Correct? So inna deen inda Allah al-Islam is a general statement that would hold true even in the time of Moses and Noah and all the way back to Adam. The same statement would have been true, that religion in God's eyes is submission, total submission to Him, al-Islam. وَمَا اخْتَلَفَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ. So then the question arises, well, where do we get all these different religions? Even at the time when the Quran is revealed, we have Jews as a separate religious tradition, Christians as a separate religious tradition, and then others as well. The Hunafa we have as a separate tradition, the Mushrikeen also claiming to be Hunafa, claiming to be followers of Ibrahim, also as a separate religion. And others as well, Zoroastrians and other religions as well. So where did all these come from if ad-din 'inda Allah is Islam? If submission and there's one religion before God, he says the ikhtilaf that comes amongst those who have been given books is not from the source, but rather of their own manufacture. وَمَا اخْتَلَفَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ. Those who were given the book and who were given a revealed religion, they didn't do ikhtilaf and deviate and become different religions إِلَّا مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَهُمُ الْعِلْمُ بَغْيًا بَيْنَهُم. Except after knowledge came to them. Revelation came to them with the same unified religion. Moses' religion was not supposed to be different from Jesus's. Moses' religion came, and then Jesus' teaching simply confirmed, and all the followers of Moses ideally were supposed to now follow Jesus and continue as followers not only of Moses but also of Jesus, which is the latest form and the most complete form of the same religion of Moses. Right? But they departed, and the Jews decided they're going to stick with Moses and ignore Jesus, and then some people followed Jesus to the exclusion of the law of Moses. Right? So you ended up with these different religions, not because God intended that to be the case. إِلَّا مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَهُمُ الْعِلْمُ. It was after knowledge came to them, revelation came to them, that they amongst themselves decided they want to split for their own reasons. Why? بَغْيًا بَيْنَهُم. Because of different kinds of clashes, maybe personal grudges, maybe racial and ethnic sort of grudges, whatever it might be, power struggles. Those are what caused the rifts amongst the different religions. If it was, from Allah's perspective, it was all one continuous chain and all the followers should have been following in line with that one particular religion. وَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ سَرِيعُ الْحِسَابِ. Anyone who rejects the signs of God and the verses of God, then Allah is going to be fast and swift in His retribution against those people. So that's a threat against them. The next verse says, فَإِنْ حَاجُّوكَ فَقُلْ أَسْلَمْتُ وَجْهِيَ لِلَّهِ وَمَنِ اتَّبَعَنِ. Now if those Jews and Christians and even the mushrikeen, if they come to you and they start to argue with you, in حَاجُّوكَ, if they start to argue and debate with you and say, what about you? Aren't you coming up with a new religion now? Now you're making the problem even worse. We had Judaism and Christianity until now. Now you're coming up with a third religion. This is also another deviation, right? So the response that Allah tells the Prophet to give is فَقُلْ أَسْلَمْتُ وَجْهِيَ لِلَّهِ وَمَنِ اتَّبَعَنِ. That I and those who follow me, we've all submitted ourselves completely to Allah. Right? We've done Islam. Inna deen عند Allah Islam is there. Islam is the true religion. It's total submission. We've done it. Right, we've done it. وَقُلْ لِلَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابِ. Now turn the question back to them, those who have been given books, وَالْأُمِّيِّينَ, and the mushrikeen who haven't been given books, and now turn the question back to them and say, أَأَسْلَمْتُمْ? Right, I've submitted to God, I've submitted to Islam. Have you? What about you? Are you Muslim? Have you submitted to this one religion of God? فَإِنْ أَسْلَمُوا فَقَدْ اهْتَدَوْا. If they do, if they submit to what their teachings are, part of which is a prophecy that a prophet will come later on whose name is Ahmad, who has these characteristics, and you must follow him. So if they follow Moses and Jesus, then they have to also submit and follow this latest prophet, the latest version of their religion. فَقَدْ اهْتَدَوْا. Then they've found guidance and they're perfectly fine. وَإِن تَوَلَّوْا. But if they turn away, فَإِنَّمَا عَلَيْكَ الْبَلَاغُ. It's not your problem, O Prophet. Your job was just to communicate to them. You've done your job. Right? Balagh, tabligh was your job, not forcing them to believe. Whether they believe or not is their job. Your effective communication of the teachings and answering their questions and clarifying their doubts, this is all that you are expected to do. فَإِنَّمَا عَلَيْكَ الْبَلَاغُ وَاللَّهُ بَصِيرٌ بِالْعِبَادِ. Alright, so these verses also help us to see that same dynamic. Unity of religion, singular message, given in multiple forms or in multiple, let's not even say multiple forms, just reaffirmed by prophet after prophet, with the intention that the followers will transfer over. Those who follow the previous prophet will follow the subsequent prophet. And that we're not supposed to have a diversity of religions, but rather we're supposed to have unity of all followers of the one deen, which is Islam in God's eyes. Okay, I'm going to stop there. There are two more passages I want to share with you that are also helpful in the same way. Inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow by looking at those verses. Salawat ala Muhammad. So we can take about 5 or 10 minutes if there are questions or clarifications from today's lecture.
I have a question. So you mentioned that verse, Inna dina indallah al-Islam. So al-Islam in that verse, are we defining that as a general act of submission, or al-Islam, not necessarily the one that our Holy Prophet brought, but the same Islam that was brought by Adam and all the other prophets?
The latter. Yes, he's asking how are we defining Islam, not as the specific teachings of our Prophet, but rather the general teachings, of which this is a culmination. It's not that this is something different, that's something different. It's, think of divinely revealed religion, with all the teachings of faith, all the practices, as one unified body of teaching. The difference between earlier teachings of that Islam and later teachings of that Islam is only a difference of some being less complete because the grounds were not yet prepared for people to have the full version of it. So kind of like yesterday, the recapitulation I said of a child, in the younger ages you'll teach them more basic concepts. It's only as they grow older and their minds can handle more subtle concepts that you can then expose them to those nuances of religion. It's the same way with society. So the difference between earlier versions and later versions is the difference of simpler versus more complex, less thorough and more thorough. Not the difference of various versions and various religions and various paths that are divergent but all somehow lead to the same place, which is the way the pluralists think. Right?
The Torah, the Talmud has a lot of laws in it. I mean, some would even compare it with, like, you know, modern Islamic laws. Some of our dietary laws are actually derived and used as go to there. So what's the difference between Islamic law and Jewish law?
So I'm no expert. He's asking what's the difference between Islamic law and Jewish law. I don't have much exposure to Jewish law at all, so I can't speak to what they have, except what in our Islamic sources is mentioned. Sometimes in the Quran it talks about certain restrictions that they have. One idea that's reflected in a hadith is that and even the Quran mentions this, that the Jews had a particular attitude towards divine guidance and towards their prophets that made Allah kind of tighten the reins on them more and more and make things harder and harder for them in retribution for their own stubbornness. فَبِمَا أَكْلِهِمُ السُّحْتِ قَتْلِهِمُ الْأَنْبِيَاء, and all these different things that they did. They partook in riba when they weren't supposed to. They killed their prophets when of course they weren't supposed to. They engaged in and other kinds of practices like this, and because of all this, Allah says we made the law very difficult for them. Right? It's a reflection of the verse that comes لا تسألوا عن أشياء تبدى لكم تسؤكم. Don't ask about things. Like sometimes some people ask a question and they don't really want to know the answer. They're trying to find an excuse for how they can get out of something. Right? So don't ask questions like that where if I'm to tell you the answer, it'll become harder for you and it'll become more difficult for you than if you hadn't. The Jews did that. I think of the story of the calf that they were supposed to slaughter. Right? They're supposed to slaughter a calf. They could have slaughtered any old cow. Right? But they say, tell us exactly what kind of cow it is, what color is it, and exactly what kind of cow is it. Tell us the exact specifications. Every time they asked the question, Allah increased the restrictions on what kind of cow it could be, until finally the restrictions were so severe that there was only one cow available that satisfied the restrictions that Allah had placed on them. And that happened to be in the household in the possession of this one person who was a very righteous person. Allah wanted to support that person, and so he arranged a circumstance like this. The mother of this individual, according to a hadith, tells the son, don't sell this cow for anything less than the weight of its skin in gold. When they slaughter it, they open up the skin, stuff it with gold, and that's how much gold it can hold. That's the price of that cow. They did it to themselves. Allah didn't require that initially, but because of their stubbornness, He increased the stakes and pushed them into this position. So that's a microcosm, a parable. It really happens a story, but it's also a symbol that helps us to understand the general way that the Jews interacted with Allah. And then Isa alayhi salam comes. He's the last of the Bani Israel's prophets. Kind of this last-ditch effort on Allah's part to try to get them back in line. Making things harder for them, punishing them didn't seem to affect them. So He says, okay, let's send a prophet who will make things easy for them. وَلِيُحِلَّ لَكُمْ بَعْضَ الَّذِي حُرِّمَ عَلَيْكُمْ. I've come to make some things halal for you that have been made haram before, make some things easier for you, and they still failed. Not only did they not follow His teaching, they tried to kill Him altogether. Yeah. So there's that difference of severity. Sometimes the relationship between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam is portrayed like this. I think this is also reflected in some ahadith, that Judaism was extremely legally heavy and difficult. Put a lot of burden on the people, again, because of the same reason. Christianity tends to be very light on the law. Right? It's much easier than that was. And Islam is somewhere in between the two, where we do have quite a bit of legal restrictions and things, but it's not nearly as severe as the Jewish law was. Sisters.
So when Sabbath was asked of the Israelites to follow, they kind of changed into three different factions. One were the people that followed it to the letter. Another was the people that transgressed, and the third were the people that followed the Sabbath but didn't admonish the ones that transgressed. In the end, what happened was that God punished both the transgressors as well as the people that never admonished. So my question is that something that translates into Islam today? Are we held to sort of that same standard? Whereas you're not committing the sin or the act, but you're not exactly going out and admonishing those who are.
Right. Yeah, so the question is about, it relates to enjoining good and forbidding evil. So she's referring to the story of Ashab al-Sabt, in which the Sabbath is ordained for them. they're a fishing town. They're not able to find fish on the non-Sabbath days. As a test, on the Sabbath itself, that's when Allah sends all the fish. And they see these fish leaping around in the water, but it's a Sabbath, they can't do anything to catch them. As soon as the Sabbath is over, the fish are all gone. Right? So he tests them like this, and so then they come up with a trick. They try to trick Allah by setting up certain traps and things to technically not fish on the Sabbath, but in reality fish on the Sabbath. They try to pull it over on Allah, and so in that process, there are some who disregard the law, there's some who abide by the law, and there's some who admonish those who are not abiding by the law, and then some who don't admonish. So a couple of different factions. And so Allah punishes not only the ones who transgress, but also the ones who didn't bother admonishing the ones who were transgressing. They weren't actually fishing, they weren't actually partaking in the plot, but they didn't bother telling the people who were transgressing that what you're doing is wrong. And so they're also liable for that. And so that is true. In joining good and forbidding evil, not only is the sinner liable for his actions, but also the one who could have helped the person and guided the person and didn't is also liable. There's also responsibility on that person. Yeah, so that's a separate discussion about joining good and forbidding evil, but that should make it all the more serious for us, that we shouldn't think that, it's up to you. If you want to do it, that's your business, and I'm just going to mind my own business. What you do is my business. As Muslim, whatever anyone else does, if I have influence, if I have the ability to help that person, guide that person, remind that person, or even physically stop that person from doing something that's haram, then I have that responsibility to do it. And if I don't, then not only is he liable for committing the sin, but I'm also liable for not having stopped it.
I have a question as well.
Maybe we can continue tomorrow, because we need to stop in preparation for the iftar as well. Allah, we ask you to shower your blessings and mercy on Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. We ask you to continue to guide us, especially during these nights. Give us the tawfiq to engage in worship in a way that is pleasing to you. Help us to stay up on these evenings of Laylatul Qadr, to engage in worship and to show you that we are worthy of the good decrees that you have for this coming year. We ask you for all the goodness of life, health, and strength to be good Muslims and to abstain from sin. And we ask you to help us to be champions of the oppressed and always enemies of those who cause the oppression. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين.